Yeah, there he is. Jeff Sharlet, safe and sound. I'm always worried about you. You're out there on the road alone, standing in people's lawns taking pictures of their flags. And then I get worried, but I love your every dispatch. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for having me and making me sound so creepy. Standing in people's lawns, taking pictures of their flags.
I mean,
it is true. What I'm doing is and this story that we're going to talk about is walking up to people's houses and taking photographs. But then we live in a moment when people are flying these very provocative fascist flags. They're saying, "Look at me. Let's engage." So the question is, do we do so?
right. Well, the other question, though, just is I want to get into your reporting and kind of how you do it and why you do it. Because the other thing is, if it were me walking up taking those pictures, I could get away with not necessarily identifying as one of the main categories that a lot of these folks don't like, love, or want to even kill. You are pretty open with everybody in their house while their guns are out. You're like, oh, I'm Jewish. I mean, it is a fascinating and dangerous job. Plus, you're a pretty well-known guy. If anybody wanted to Google your name, tell me the rules and kind of ethics about this reporting trip and why you went to Wisconsin, kind of how you do it. Take us inside your craft because it's really important, I think.
So I mean, it's in the book. So this is this piece in Vanity Fair, which I think on Vanity Fair online they give it a headline. The headline they give it was like "Fuck Biden," which is like one of the flags. But I'm sort of like, and I think they did that as sort of like a trolling thing, like,
Yeah.
oh, the right wingers like, all right, Vanity Fair has got it, and and then they're in. But the piece is really called "Great Acceleration." It's part of this book called "The Undertow: Scenes from the Slow Civil War," and it's a little bit as what I'm trying to do is get us to think, it's an old thing. The personal is political, right? I mean, we've known that for a long time and we still don't quite get it, right? So you always understanding those things both at the same time. So I'm in Wisconsin, not because I've decided, I've carefully studied the 50 states and picked Wisconsin as the one that is most representative. It's not. I was in Wisconsin because to be honest, I was taking my child to a program there, a health program. So I was there for the summer with my child, and there was a lot of time that I couldn't be spending with them because they're involved in the program. So I would use that time to drive around the state. And I didn't know that Roe was going to fall while I was there,
Right.
and that I was going to be there the day Roe fell. And I was just going to so happen be with some people who were acquainted with some people who were in the process of getting IVF. And literally the woman was in the examining room. They're trying to bring a life in the world, and the doctor comes in crying right after the decision has come down and says, we can't go through with this. This is no longer legal. Wisconsin was the only blue state in the country in which abortion immediately became 100% illegal. It reverted to an 1849 law, which is right back at the beginning of Wisconsin, making no exceptions for abortion. So
But to be clear, this woman, because as you're right, this woman was pregnant with triplets. Is that the deal?
No, she wasn't. But the risk with IVF, one of the risks, and there's a number of them. And in fact, when you look at the so-called pro-life movement, which is in this case trying to stop people from conceiving, they are going to target IVF next. That's stated because more embryos are created or potentially created than are going to be used. So they're saying every one of those. So you can't do that. So in other words, if she could be, and that doctor could be guilty of murder, and all over the state, things were stopping right in the middle of that process. So I decided, okay, I'm in Wisconsin. I'm going to travel. This is now suddenly Wisconsin, which is a battleground state, has really become very unique in this way. And it was shadowed for me by this book, which gives the story its frame, called Wisconsin Death Trip, 1973 book by Michael Lessie, which is a very strange book. And Michael Lessie is a very strange man and happens to have been my mentor and teacher. And it's about the 1890s in Wisconsin. And if you know that small town Americana of the 19th century wasn't all apple pie and sweetness, and you think we always knew that actually has a lot to do with that book in 1973, which was a landmark book going back to these photo archives of a small town, Black River Falls, Wisconsin, and reading the newspaper, just the daily newspaper. And what do you find? You find arson, insanity, murder. You find infanticide, people throwing down wells. You find there's one woman who appears throughout who is she's the Antifa of her time, going around the state smashing windows. But in her case, nobody really knows why. She's just raging against the machine, I guess. So I went around Wisconsin to check for an update.
Well, you got one and you shared it with us, and it's fascinating and entertaining and terrifying, and we can draw conclusions from it, but I really wanted to know kind of, why Wisconsin, what you're doing there, and it clears it up now, and when you were there, because it's like interesting seeing you put together things and documenting your trip on social media, on Twitter specifically, and then seeing the articles in the book, of course. And I just am really always interested in all the reporting you're doing. So you get basically, what was the goal here? What was the project? Because you were meeting a lot of people who were inviting you into their homes and telling you their plans and allowing you to take photographs of their guns and giving you all kinds of quotes. And how do you meet these people and get invited in their home?
I mean, you knock. It's not that hard. But the thing is, I'd driven out to Wisconsin with my kid, who's 13, and we're driving. We decided let's make a good trip of it. Let's not drive the highways. We'll drive the smaller roads. And it was such a drumbeat of flags, of these fascist flags all across the country. And in the story, I made the photographs of the story too. There's a grid of 9 of these fascist flags. I collected hundreds of them. And my kid, who's 13 and happens to be a non-binary kid, we're driving across the landscape, and everywhere we're seeing these flags that are targeted, not just against them as a Jew, but as a queer kid, are targeted against them at youth. I mean, this is sort of like the idea of like we could be in civil war. They're like, but Dad, I'm everywhere where I feel like I'm in occupied territory.
Yeah.
And that, by the way, I live in Vermont. That starts literally a mile away from here, where there's a flag of Trump as Rambo with a big machine gun.
Yeah.
So I was curious about these flags, and when I was not with my child, I wouldn't do this with my child. I would stop, and I would knock. And the first sort of the big centerpiece of the story is the family Brum, the Brum family of Marinette, Wisconsin.
They're amazing.
And it's part of what's interesting is Wisconsin and Michigan are big militia states. They're sort of one of the centers. And I stumbled onto the commander through no intention. I was just wandering, and I see this flag that says "fuck Trudeau," which is unusual in Wisconsin. Usually it's "fuck Biden," or some variation thereof, of which there are really just sort of endless variations that they've made on these flags. So I stopped to take a picture, and this woman just pops right out, and she's not rude. She's not friendly. She wants to know what I'm doing on her lawn, taking a picture of her window, which is a pretty reasonable question, actually. And I say, I'm a journalist. I make pictures. And she said, my husband's a photojournalist too. And he comes out, and it's Rob Brum, big guy. And I think there's a lot of stereotypes of all militia guys as overweight and out of shape and so on. No, Rob's a big, fit guy. And he's got a 45 on his hip, and he's all in camouflage. And I tell him what I'm doing, photographing the "fuck Trudeau" flag. And he says, well, I've got 2. Do you want one? So, like, what's the right answer there?
I think the answer is absolutely.
Oh, thank you, sir. And he says, come inside. And, when someone with a gun, whose lawn you are trespassing on, and little did you know you had tripped off multiple motion sensors, and that they considered themselves as having 3 sort of peripheries, all marked. They're in constant combat mode. I had already crossed 2 of them without knowing it. They knew it. You go in, and I walk in, and the center room, it's a very crowded house. There's a bunch of kids, but there's a pool table covered with ARs, ammunition, handguns, long guns. There's a big TV up on the screen in the corner playing on loop footage of January 6th, which turns out to be a footage that Rob, who was a wedding videographer had shot. He was a J6er himself, a January 6er himself. There is not only the fuck Trudeau flag, there's the don't tread on me flag, and there is the scariest flag you can see in America right now, which is the all black American flag of no mercy, no quarter. And what that flag stands for is in the coming civil war that folks believe is happening. It means you take no prisoners. There are no prisoners. You just kill everyone on the other side. It's an exterminationist flag. So there's a lot of guns, a lot of flags, and lucky for me, 4 cats.
Because you're allergic.
No, because cats are cute and it's sort of.
Oh, I thought you were being. I know.
Everybody loves cats. I said, Rob, can I take a picture of your cat? The cat's sitting there by the AR. He says, yeah, the cat's name is Twitch.
But it's wild because the pictures are in the article. You have to see. I mean, Jeff is an awesome photographer, and you've got to just obviously read the article. But the photography, it's like he didn't invite a reporter over and set up this room and throw on J6. He just he invited you in, and that's how that room normally looks. And apparently, the insurrection is on a loop in his house, and that's and then you find out he's the leader of a local militia that he claims has, let's see, 6,700 people. Later, you talked to him on the phone because you followed up, apparently, 7,500 people. You write, are the numbers real? Inflated, perhaps, but maybe also real enough.
They were real enough in the sense that I saw enough evidence that whether there are many thousands, there are definitely hundreds. And there's definitely uniforms and everything else, and they're doing night training exercise. But Pete, you actually hit on a point there. I wish it wasn't too late. I could go and revise this and add this in. You say it's not like he was prepping. He just had those guns on the table and the insurrection playing on a loop. And you're right, that's exactly it. The metaphor is the insurrection playing on a loop. It's always the apocalypse is always now, the insurrection is always now. And part of the reason he let me in, by the way, is he's so prepared to be arrested. And his line is, if they call me and say I need to be arrested, I will go in peacefully. If they show up at my door, well, you see what he's got inside. And he says all the guns on the table. He says, can I photograph this? He says, oh yeah. Everything you can see is legal,
right.
And that's sort of his coy thing. I said, Rob, were you packing on January 6th? Because he always carries. And he says, well, let's just put it this way. I didn't get mugged in Washington, D.C., which is in the racist imagination. The only way a white man could not get mugged in Washington, D.C. is if he's carrying a gun.
Which is, by the way, the same thing I always say, but I'm not carrying a gun. I just want to keep you guessing. I mean, what are you
doing? Rob, I've also been watching to see quite a bit my whole life. I've never been mugged. What's going on here? This is crazy.
Well, look at me. I look dangerous.
I do. Yeah. It's the baldness.
What? Yeah, exactly. It's always creepy. What are the rules that he know? What does he ask about you? What did he, does he know that you're writing for Vanity Fair and he might be included in this article? Does he want the PR?
I think let's face it. There's people flying fascist flags all over the country right now.
That's what I'm saying. It's like they're not hiding.
You put up a flag with an AR-15 on it, as I encountered in many places. There's the white flag with an AR-15 that says "Come and take it." There's flags across the AR-15s. There's flags. There's an American flag, which is it's white and the stripes are AR-15s and the stars are Glocks. So all these gun flags. You put up a flag like that, you are both warning, but you're also inviting. Like you're not trying to fade in, right? So I think there's an element of that, and I think he sort of said, "Look, you might be a Fed. I don't care. You might be a real writer. You might not. You might be a Fed." He had been a journalist. That was what was interesting. He had on his wall, in fact, awards from the AP for his photojournalism. And so he knew the drill. I mean, he was even like sort of like, well, the lighting in here is bad. Let me turn on the lights for you and help you out a little bit. He knew more about lighting than I did.
Well, the most fascinating things of all the things you might be, but you found out he might be a Jew. Not really, but like
Well,
generations removed. Like you wrote some sense about he's had like 9 generations of Christianity between him and whatever
yeah, he
Poland.
had decided to be a Jew, and that was what was interesting. And that was, you know, oftentimes too, some of these guys with flags are just sullen, right? Some of these guys with flags are guys with a lot of opinions. And maybe the people in their life are tired of hearing all those opinions. But a writer comes up and is willing to talk. Rob wanted to talk. Um, and then when he found out I was a Jew, he was even more excited. Rob was from this small town in Wisconsin. And he had discovered through some genealogical research that his 19th century ancestors, whom he had always thought were Lutherans, he had been raised as a Lutheran, um, uh, may in fact have been Jews who decided in the New World to pass because, you know, why sign up for that shit again? And so he had decided to become a Jew as well. And he was sort of interested in like figuring out some Yiddish, and he was very self-taught. What was complicated about it was, and I say this, some people say this family isn't representative of Wisconsin. And I'm like, no, it's really not. The head of the militia with an arsenal of guns, run by a Jew who says that his militia is anti-Semitic, but they respect him because he's the alpha wolf, whose wife says she's a Druid, and
Yeah.
whose daughter is a Nazi. His daughter, Athena, is sitting there. And well, she complains when people call her a Nazi. It's complicated. She's got a big German flag. She's definitely not Jewish. She rejects that 100%. Big German flag tattoo with the Iron Cross.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
last time you put
imperial
those
Germany.
together,
Not
yeah,
you explain. She explains it different. She has a good listen. This whole family is fascinating. You write a lot about them, but as you said, this
you even
isn't
get to the 3-year-old who's already training with an AR.
it's I was so glad that the article took a turn away from that family because I was getting scared and more like upset by it. But yeah, the 3-year-old, he's arguing that Athena first held a gun 2 and a half, he says, and she corrects him and says 2. It's like,
She
how?
learned on the Dirty Harry gun,
Yeah,
which he picked up and racked. I mean, he had been 82nd Airborne. He knew how to handle guns. At the same time, he was demonstrating them very freely. There was lots of gun
yeah,
pointing.
you're
Um,
crazy for going in there, but I'm glad that you did, and I'm glad that
they
you.
offered me pizza. It was nice, but it was taco pizza, which I'm not going to eat. That was a
Oh,
bridge too
really?
far. Yeah.
Aren't you like a vegetarian or something anyway?
Yeah. There's no way I was going to eat that. But like
Yeah.
to be polite in another situation, I might have said yes. But taco pizza,
I'll take you say yes to the fuck Trudeau flag, but you draw the line at the taco
taco.
pizza. But I think that's understandable if you want to get the story.
But so like this is a remarkable family. But the thing is, you then drive down the road,
Yeah,
and it's the same guy. They're just not as articulate, you know. And so the story becomes this drumbeat of these folks, each with their own different idea. Because I'm talking to them about Roe. So like for instance, Rob, he's like, I actually don't care. He's sort of a libertarian. However, we must outlaw abortion because, and this is his logic, which I discovered, in fact, he didn't make it up himself. This is a thing on the right. He said black women have abortions at a higher rate than white women. This is true. He had a wildly inflated number.
yeah, yeah.
And, and his idea was that black people were cannon fodder necessary for a future war with China. He says, I
Oh,
can't spare those black bodies. That's his line
oh
for
God.
my front line. You go down the road, and each guy has his own profoundly biologically naive. Like none of these men had any idea how reproduction worked. I mean, if this could have been a story that is the case for sex ed in the Midwest, you know, I mean, they needed to know some things
And
about.
they clearly don't understand statistics and demographics and economics, and they're not paying very close attention to actually China and what's happening with their economy. I mean, it's not really well thought out, but it's the kind of right-wing talk radio theory of replacement theory or whatever version of it, and then add it to a future war with a future aggressor, in this case, China, because they're having tons of babies, but it's just not very thought out. It's just a good.
I would disagree with you there, Pete. And I think this is actually, to me, what's the alarming thing, right? So, you know, as I'm traveling across the country, we're seeing all these fascist flags. I'm trying to reassure my 13-year-old. And whenever we pull into a city, what do you see? You see pride flags, lots of pride flags. There are probably more pride flags flying in America than there are these fascist flags, but they're very concentrated. It's very geographically divided. But here's the other thing that my kid and I both noticed. The pride flag, it's pretty much always the same pride flag or the same Black Lives Matter sign. You buy it, it's mass produced. There must be 150 variations of fascist flags. And then that's not counting all the ones that people make themselves, the banners, this Americana evil folk art of fascism. And what that shows is, yes, they're receiving the signal, but they are thinking about it, not in a way of deep understanding, but they're spinning their own variations on it. In fact, it feels important to them to add something to it. Like the number of guys, for instance, speaking of the news, who talked to me about Elon Musk, right? They'd been thinking about this. This is before Elon Musk had bought Twitter.
Yeah, yeah.
They were thinking
Yep.
about Elon Musk, the inventor, one fascist who says a civil war is going to lay waste to the world. He's been watching Terminator too many times, but fortunately, Elon Musk is going to settle Mars for us. And I don't know if you saw that literally this morning, Elon Musk tweeted about settling Mars. They're all in the same fantasy world, but they all experience themselves as in some ways thinking for the first time in their lives. They're making shit up and they are falling for lies and they are indulging in hate. But it's important to understand what they think they're doing and to understand that critical mass of energy. Like it disturbs me that on the left, I don't see the same creativity and leftist folk art. I do in some places as I travel across the country. I do in a lot of Black neighborhoods where I'll see a lot of really great anti-fascist art in one way or another. But elsewhere, no, it's nothing. And it's because we're still assuming that we're the center of things, as opposed to this is spinning out. This is centrifuging. We are approaching civil war. I don't say we have to get there, but I have no question that we're approaching it for no other reason than everybody I spoke to thought it was coming.
You think that your work and your writing right now, your journalism is doing a really good job uncovering what these folks are thinking, what their desires are, what their impulses, their motivations, what their war, their version of it is, and you think that that's really important to scream from the mountaintops that this is happening, this is who they are. What is that? Is that what you think?
I mean, to a certain extent, I do it a little bit because I find it weirdly reassuring that I can have that I can go out and I can still go out and find out things, and that's changed. I think we talked about a piece I had in Vanity Fair
Yeah.
last summer, in which for the first time in my life, I had a gun pointed at me at a church in the
Yeah.
United States. But that I can
Yeah,
still
that's
go
why
out.
I worry about you a lot.
Well, I look, I mean, I'm no tough guy. I have rules, guidelines about not how to do this. But I think it's that, but also to take the measure of things. And this story in the magazine version and in the book version more, there's a longer section, sort of almost the second half is uh, I don't want to say the other side. I just want to say another side, which
Which
is
I wanna get to, yeah, and talk about Waukesha. Is it Waukesha?
not in Waukesha,
Black River.
Black River Falls. Black River Falls. Yeah, I did go to Waukesha, which is you know, Wisconsin's kind of, I mean, there is, like, I was in Wisconsin by accident, but Wisconsin turns out to be the right place to be. There's a book out that I recommend called How Civil Wars Start by political scientist Barbara F. Walter, who, working with this international team of political scientists, they studied every civil war they could of the last 30 years or so. And as political scientists do, sort of boiling it down, looking for common factors. And they've been doing this for years. And the United States has recently crossed over to, doesn't mean we're going to have a civil war. It means we are definitely in the category where it's quite possible. In her final chapter, she says, okay, what would it even look like Where does she start? Wisconsin. And partly because it's a very purple state. It's about evenly divided, but it's wildly segregated. Milwaukee is the second most segregated city in America, and it's wildly gerrymandered. You got a purple state with no exaggeration, literally a truly fascist state legislature, and that's explosive. And and Black River Falls, I get there, and it's explosive all around. It's not just the right. I come into town, Black River Falls, little town in sort of eastern central Wisconsin. Um, and there on the bridge over the Black River is this young woman, these three young women holding signs. One's got a sign that says "Your misogyny is showing," and it's a great sign. And I get to talking to them, and they're just local teens, college and high school, and the local anti-abortion preacher had come out and had been screaming at them, and so their friends came to support them. A cheerleader. I'm so proud I got this in Vanity Fair. This photograph of a cheerleader for the Black River Falls Tigers, and she has made her sign, her protest sign, and it says bright red letters, "Fuck off." And
Yeah.
that is her message essentially to the preacher, you, me, all of us older folks who have failed. She's like, I'm about to go out into the world, and now I don't have my freedom. And if you can't respect my rights, fuck off. I ended up spending a lot of time with these kids, uh, and they were the most wholesome group you could imagine. Student body presidents and all this and so on, and really nice kids. We went to Perkins, and they had big piles of pancakes like you do
Yeah.
as a teenager. But then it kind of turns to revolution and civil war. I said, a lot of the people I've been talking to think there's going to be a civil war, and I expect them to be stunned and horrified. They're like, we're ready. And this being Wisconsin, rural Wisconsin, they all know how to shoot. Some
Yeah.
of them know how to shoot really well, and they're looking forward to it. They say this is a foregone conclusion. We're ready for the war. One of them's going into the Navy. She's like, I need to, she hopes the Navy will be on the right side, but whatever. She's going to learn combat training, and I find this both hopeful and scary. Mostly hopeful. The hearts were good. They weren't the ones who were menacing people with guns. Scary too, though, because it had come to the point we as adults had failed them so badly that they see the need to take up arms to defend themselves. And I don't have a solution for that. I'm not like one of these people who's going to come in and say, here's the correct next step for the campaign or whatever and so on. I'm just looking at that and saying, you said, why do I do this? I'm like, yeah, we need to look at that. And whatever bubble you're in, and there are many, we've got to look beyond them. And I hope someone smarter than me looks and says, okay, here's what we do.
Well, you're doing a great job documenting it. These young people are really inspiring. I love this. As always, your photography is awesome. To partner with your brilliant prose and research, and somehow your ability to get in just about any room and get just about anybody to talk to you and share their story in the most honest of ways. And everybody's got to get the book, The Undertow, and read this article in Vanity Fair. But before I let you go, what do you make of recent events? You're always tweeting about things. First of all, I mean, how have you seen Twitter change in the last few weeks since Elon is on there, and have you made any decisions about how you're going to use it, not use it, etc.?
Well, I signed on to Mastodon. I got a Substack going, but I'm pretty tech illiterate, so mainly I'm on Twitter because I can't figure out the other platforms. And also because if this is going to become the night, like I'm also on Parler and Gab and all those kinds of things because I want to see what's going on. So if Twitter is going to become that, I would be there. But I do think it's actually a contested space. I think it's complicated. I don't think we have too many questions left about practically speaking who Elon is.
Okay, go ahead. Who is he?
I want to say I don't really care about his personal motives or what's driving him. That's not my concern.
Okay.
That's not my business.
Okay.
Practically speaking, he is servicing fascism. whether he understands that or not. And people sort of, I think, waste a lot of time trying to figure out motives and so on. It doesn't matter. That's what's happening. You can look at it. You read his Twitter feed. He is in daily dialogue with a lot of figures of the far right. And that makes him a figure of the far right. Whether or not, again, he understands himself. Some people say, well, he was always this and I always knew it. And here's the important thing. No, he wasn't. What he was before, we know this. We know this from his spending. He was a technocratic center-right Democrat, right? Not particularly. He was sort of whatever.
You kind of knew him. I just always
Sure.
his issue with renewable energy and electric cars, and he did talk about it as a way to kind of save the planet. Obviously, rockets and exploration. Like if you just looked at some of the products he's behind, you'd be like, "Oh, I'm glad this guy's doing this." And then when you look like behind the curtain a little bit, you're like, "Good God, this man is a crazy person."
He is, but he wasn't this. And I think what's fascinating to me is another article, by the way, I'll recommend is, and I wish I could remember the title, Catherine Joyce's in Salon, about huge crack up between two big factions of the right now. And it includes this really fascinating part. I don't know, did you see that magazine Compact? It was supposed to be sort of like this left-right, this brown-red magazine, you know, fascist, communist. No. And it's a bunch of sort of the prominent fascist, or not all fascist and far right intellectuals, with a bunch of, you know, former leftists and even a Marxist editor. And the Marxist editor who's like, you know, well, we agree on class, so let's talk about this. But he ended up realizing pretty quickly, and it was funded, I think, by Peter Thiel. The Marxists sort of like realized, like, I feel so naive. I was really wrong. I didn't understand that what fascism right now is, it's, you know, it's a black hole. It has incredible gravity and it's pulling things in. And as it pulls more in, its strength grows. And I look at Elon Musk in that light because he reminds me so much of a lot of the folks I've written about and talked to who weren't necessarily far right. They were just addled, who then gravitate toward that. He looks like someone who's gone down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And I think about it, it's one thing to get an incel from the basement and, you know, to have gravity enough, strong enough. It's another thing to get a billionaire or several billionaires lately with their own force fields. I mean, their own gravity fields. That shows us that the black hole of fascism is building strength. And it doesn't do us any good to say, oh, Elon Musk was always a jerk. We should be terrified as hell that it's got enough strength to pull him in.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great analysis. It's hard
to staying on Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
and you've been through the worst of it on Twitter, right?
Yeah, I've been through the worst of it a couple times. You know, I think the worst is being called a pedophile. You know, being accused of, you know, committing crimes and stuff you haven't committed. I guess a pretty bad thing, but you know, and the threats and stuff. But I shouldn't say the worst of it because, like, you know, my friend Mara Quint and like so many other women and Jewish people. I mean, like it's daily and it's the kind of different kind of hatred and threats that they then like track, you know. So I would, for someone in my lane, in public, but I like it still in terms of connecting with people and reading. Like I like to know where you're at and what you're doing, Jeff, Sharlet, and so many other people. Like I think it's a great place to connect with people, and so it's still working that way for me. I am worried about it, obviously, and how it gets manipulated. And
Mastodon's not going to work that way. It's not designed to work that way. And I worry about that in the sense, Mastodon seems to me, you know, the piece is called Great Acceleration, which is this, began as a Marxist term and is now this right-wing term, this fascist term. Like, let's speed it up. What can we do to get the separation faster?
Yeah.
Mastodon feels to me inadvertently accelerationist, but then so does Elon. So where do you go? And you can say, I'll drop out altogether, but that's the speed up as well.
It's really hard to know where to go right now in terms of social media. It's a really confusing time, but I certainly think it's something that we should just keep talking about in the spaces and places that we do feel safe talking about, which is why I'm always psyched that you joined me here in my shed.
Yeah.
you're out there you're continuing to do great work, Jeff. And it's really valuable, the work that you do. It's really meaningful, and I love reading it, and I certainly love getting to talk to you about it. So keep going, man.
Thanks, Pete. Likewise.